Welcome and thank you to the listeners for joining. As you know, the purpose of our podcasts are honest, hopeful conversations about autism education and inclusion. The podcast series Included, Not Excluded. And today I'm really excited to introduce our guests, Laura Bodycot, who is a parent, and Jessica Hargreaves, who is an occupational therapist. And our focus today in Included, Not Excluded is all around sensory environments. So we're bringing together the parent experience and the professional insight to explore how sensory environments matter for autistic learners. As you all know, the recent SEND committee paper came out and it reported that unsuitable classrooms can contribute to placement breakdowns, and families often feel unheard. So this episode really looks at what we can do to change that. So I'd like to bring Laura in first. Hi, Laura. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your son first?
Yeah, sure. So his name is Rowan. He is 7.5. He was diagnosed with autism around January, February this year. We had been kind of battling getting a referral made since he was about 3. I kind of noticed a few little signs quite early on when he was in preschool. And it took quite a while for people to kind of understand what I was saying. The teachers were not necessarily seeing the issues we were having at home. I suppose mainly due to the fact that he was masking quite a lot in school. So yeah, it was only taken until now, till February this year, to actually get that diagnosis in place.
And did you see with Rowan that the environment made a difference to how he was accessing his learning or how he was interacting?
Yes. So when I first started noticing this was when he switched from what we would call a playgroup to a preschool. So the playgroup was obviously focused on playing and, it was quite a noisy, open area where he used to come home crying. He used to say that he couldn't cope, his ears were hurting. But to me, the playgroup kind of teachers, if you want to call them, were saying, "Oh no, he did everything that we expected and was getting along well with friends." But actually, it wasn't until we switched into preschool where it was smaller rooms, more kind of one-on-one time for him, more structured, where he actually started to flourish. And then since then, being in school, he's just switched from year 2 to year 3, which is an entirely different building, new way of learning. They're more perceptive with what he needs. And again, the difference between the two has been absolutely massive. He's now allowed to have quiet time. He gets given fidgets if he needs them. The difference between the two is unbelievable.
So, Laura, have you made adjustments at home or at school that have seemed to make a big difference?
Yeah, massive ones. He's very much a sensory seeker regarding touch. So he needs things like what we call his chewy necklaces. So he has something around his neck, which he can put in his mouth. It's safe. It's not going to break off. It's not going to hurt anybody. We implemented them at home probably about 18 months ago. And the difference in his concentration and being able to focus on just even little tasks at home, tidying his bedroom or whatever was massive. Now the fact he takes it to school is game changing. He can now focus on learning and whatever else. We've also allowed him in the evenings, he has like a weighted blanket, which he uses. When he's come home from school, he's then, been made to do homework, having to chill out from the craziness of his day, allowing him that time with his blanket and his muslin square as the children's little comfort blankets that they have. Is a different child. We were very much before trying to kind of control him and keep everything in one place because he was so energetic and switching from one thing to the other. Being able to have put those adjustments in at home has calmed everything down. We now know what he needs. He knows what's expected of him. The adjustments are 100% valued.
Some of our listeners might want to know, so you said 18 months ago you introduced the chewy necklace.
Mhm.
How did you find out about that? Because that sounds like that was before you had a diagnosis. So
Correct.
it's really quite exciting to hear about, meeting a need without a diagnosis, which is great.
Yeah.
So how did you find out about the chewy
So
necklace?
He's always been a thumb sucker and still is now. He's 7.5. You know, we've obviously had tellings off from the dentist, the fact that his teeth are starting to buck and whatever else. But we noticed that the best time he could concentrate on watching the telly or tasks or homework was actually when he had something in his mouth. But we didn't want it to be his thumb because, you know, he picked up COVID 3 times just by having touched stuff and putting his thumb in his mouth. So we
Yeah.
felt that providing him something that was safe for him to chew on or suck was better than that thumb. So I did a lot of research into various types that they have. Some are like a string with kind of a rubber, like Lego shape or an animal or a smiley face or something. The ones that we found for him that work best are actually like the old versions of telephone cords. They're like a curly spiral
Oh, yeah.
wire and it's stretchy and pulley, so it's not going to break. That's kind of thing is what works for him. But it's purely just kind of own research online and TikTok and seeing what other parents use to help their kids.
If every teacher could understand one thing about sensory needs, what would it be, Laura, from your perspective as a parent?
I think for me, it's the fact that they are so different. There's no two that are ever going to be the same. When I first went in and said to them, "Oh, you know, I think Rowan might be autistic. This is my reasons." They said to me, "Well, he's not rocking back and forth. He's not banging things. He's not lashing out at other children. He's not complaining that the lights are too bright." But actually, they're not his issues. You know, his issues are textures and tastes and needing structure and a noisy environment. You know, he's now allowed to take his headphones or loops in to put in his ears. They were expecting me to say he's doing this, that, and the other, and it's just not true. So being able to have them understanding that they aren't the same, they're all going to present differently is a massive hurdle for teachers and families to jump over.
Yeah, that's really interesting, isn't it? All those sort of learnt perceptions around what a
Correct.
diagnosis might,
Hmm.
and I think we brought it up in the first podcast in the series, is that when you've met one autistic child, you've met one autistic child. Everybody is different. It's really clear from what you're saying so far, Laura, that even small changes in the environment can have a big impact for Rowan and for the family. So let's bring in Jess, our occupational therapist, to explain now why those changes matter so much.
So I think Laura hit the nail on the head when she said, all I did was observe. What is he doing to help himself? Because our kids are communicating it to us all the time and they are giving us the key as to what's going to help for them. They're not hindering themselves, they are helping themselves. But the only time they do hinder themselves is when we don't listen and we hinder from seeing what it is that they're communicating to us that they need to feel comfortable, to feel regulated, to feel like ready for learning and engagement in their environment. So that's what it means for me, is that it's an environment that nurtures and gives what it needs to give to that person. And as Laura says, that looks so different for everyone. And there's a perception, and I guess when someone is sort of bouncing around the room and has higher energy, it's more likely that they're going to get attention, not in a negative way, but just in that they need that support because they're disrupting a wider environment. And therefore, we can look at it and we see it as a need and how we can reduce that. But if we've got someone like Rowan, for example, where actually he needs those fiddles and he's internalizing it all. So at school, as you said at the start, Laura, he's like masking a lot of those things. But when he comes home, he's then really, really struggling. And that's because his tolerance has just reached maximum capacity. And we often see that where we either see something at school that we don't at home or vice versa. And that's because, again, we're all individuals dealing with our sensory systems in different ways and also the social environment in different ways. And that has a big impact, I think, as well. And it's something that we have to really consider when we're looking at sensory environment, is who is in that environment as well, and the social pressure that's there, because that has a big impact as well. But yes, sensory environments need to be adaptable and nurturing for those individuals that are in it. So if someone has a tactile need and needs that fiddle tools, as we've said, so like something to have in our hands, actually that is useful for them to concentrate. As whereas if we give a fiddle tool to someone who is quite over responsive to tactile input, they're probably going to be really distracted all lesson by this thing that's in their hands because they don't need it to concentrate. As whereas Rowan's sitting there thinking, oh my gosh, I've got to sit here and concentrate and I need to focus and I can't be playing with anything. And actually, all he's doing is focusing on focusing, not on what's happening around him.
What's coming through really clearly, as I would expect, is the individuality and the time to actually work out what individual needs are. Now, listeners who are perhaps working in busy learning environments, whether that's in a nursery or in a primary school or a college or whatever, that's going to sound like quite a big ask, isn't it? To create an environment that meets everybody's needs at all times. So, what are some of the low cost adjustments schools can make that really work, do you think?
A big one for me, especially when I've been in community and in schools, is that the display boards are lovely. And obviously, there's certain like guidelines that need to be followed on having display boards. But I think something that can be really, really useful and is free is having the space around the whiteboard or having the centralized space that you want the children to focus on, those young people to focus on, having it free from visual distractions as much as possible, and then making what you do want them to pay attention to as engaging and interactive as possible as well. That's a really, as I say, a free way of making sure that we're having to reduce the need of visual discrimination in our environment just because we've made it really clear where we want focus being. So yeah, low cost, that's definitely one. And then I think another one is having things that, like Laura said, with the Chewy that was right for her son, having things that work and are right for them. So there's no point in buying a load of tools that online say they're great for autistic people or they're great for people that fidget, because actually that might not be your person. And so again, it's looking at the individual and then trying something that's free and then investing in it if it is actually worth it. So not wasting money on things that sound game changing online and getting like sort of pulled into those traps. And then I'd say the third thing is using the natural environment. So things that happen through the day anyway. So if you need some books handing out, that child that needs more movement through their day, how about asking them to help you hand out those books? They're not being picked on, they're not being singled out. It's just, oh, I need this help in the classroom, please, could you do it? Because you know that child needs some movement. So let's give it movement, but also that heavy work through holding books is engaging our muscles and our joints, which helps to calm down and regulate. So again, just a really nice natural part of the environment. And then there's other things that naturally occur, like opening doors. We often open doors for children, but actually, again, that's heavy work that we can get them to do and get them to be engaged with, all of those sorts of things. And then the last thing that's cheap but is a resource is TheraBands. You can get a big pack of it really that you can then cut up, and so you can tie it to chair legs and then children can like fidget their feet on there, you can have it in their hands, all sorts of different things. So yeah, there's some free easy ideas to have in the classroom. And listening, looking and listening, what is it they're telling us? Do they need movement? Do they need a 5-minute break after half an hour of real concentration? And what is it in their environment that is causing them difficulties regulating?
I can imagine that a lot of that can be mirrored at home for families.
Exactly that. Mirrored at home, or like consistency, or the opposite, where if someone needs more movement and alerting activities at school, but then, as like Laura said, her son needs to come under a weighted blanket once he gets home and have time to regulate, then your balance is being met for him in a way that he needs it. So definitely the consistency so that it's understood and that child is empowered to know their sensory needs and what it means for them to regulate, and that they can request that and have that listened to at home and at school. And it's really handy to know things that do work, vice versa, because sometimes you could be struggling with something at school that actually at home you've got a solution for and you just haven't figured out, or vice versa. So yeah, definitely consistency and communication.
Can I just jump in there? At home, we've implemented a very similar system to what school do use for a group of autistic children that they've got. And we have a thing on our board of where we do all of our homework and I work from when I'm at home. And it's an order of things that we're going to work through. So first of all, we're going to do reading and then spellings and then this. And then outside the bathroom, we have something on there that is, sometimes we have struggles with remembering to flush the toilet and wash our hands and things like that. And it's a step-by-step thing. And things like that in the classroom, work really well of when they're expected to be having English in the morning and then break time. I can see Jess nodding. Things like that are cheap and they can be used at home and at school so that the children have the consistency between the two.
Definitely. And that predictability, that's all that's giving, isn't it? Is, oh, okay, I can see that I've got maths then, and then I can have a break because we're going outside for PE or whatever that might be. And it's that like understanding of what's coming next, because a lot of a child's life is controlled by adults, be it at school, at home, wherever you are. You don't have that choice. So yeah, the more predictability we can add is definitely going to be more settling for our sensory systems as well.
Brilliant. Thank you. Jess, if you could share one hopeful message with teachers and parents, what would it be?
Is that a tiny, tiny change can make a huge difference. If we feel heard and we feel cared for and listened to, then that's going to make all the difference in being able to actually engage. Yeah, a tiny change can make a big difference. We just have to understand what the need is and go from there.
Is there something in all of that as well around understanding that because something works now, it might not work in a different environment, or it might not work when the child's older or suddenly having to face other challenges or doing something different? So being responsive to need, and I guess that listening and watching, like you're both saying, is really important.
Definitely.
And I just wondered, Laura, if you've seen a change in Rowan over time, or has it been fairly consistent so far? Because actually he's still quite young.
No, there has been change. When he was that age of sort of 3 or 4, he wasn't able to tell us exactly what he felt. And now having him educated as well as us as to what he's feeling is okay. And, if he is having issues, he needs to communicate them with us. Being able to do that, we can now switch between him telling us that he's actually in a really, really bouncy mood, and then we change everything to kind of a party atmosphere at home. So he gets like a little bit of a disco to get that energy out. And then sometimes he'll just say, look, I need a cuddle, mummy. I just need to sit and watch the telly with you. Being able to do that is ever evolving. What he needs is different depending on what has happened at school that day, what's going on at the weekend. You have to be adaptive. There's no other way around it.
Jess, was there anything you wanted to bring in on that?
Yeah, just that then Laura said it really, that communication between everywhere our child or young person spends time needs to be communicated with the next person we're moving on to. Because as you say, if someone's had a really difficult morning or difficult evening before or had a bit of a rubbish sleep, that's going to have a huge impact on what we're able to tolerate, what we need in that day, especially for children, young people who might communicate in alternative methods and might not be able to say, oh, okay, this is what I need. We need to be able to read that. And sometimes the more comfortable we make someone in their sensory environment, actually then we see change as well, because they're suddenly themselves and they have this confidence and this empowerment to be like, oh, okay, I can try this out now. I can try that out now. So it's positive as well. A lot of the time is that once we make our children, young people confident that they're being heard and seen and listened to, then actually, yeah, we see change in that way as well. So forever observing, and I think just not giving up, that we will find a solution. And even if we have a bad day, that's one bad day. And it doesn't need to mean that we have a bad week or a bad month. We actually just need to go back to the drawing board and start again and just look at it with a fresh pair of eyes.
It can be a bit dependent on where you live in terms of how you're accessing good practice or what you find is good practice for your child. So, Laura, how's that been for you? And have you got a view on that for other listeners who might not be in the same position as you?
Yeah, so I can't speak for everybody, obviously, but certainly in my area, when I was researching, I'm based in Leicestershire. When I was researching, the services initially, there weren't that many places we could go that had sensory spaces, or even kind of information we could access as to things we could implement at home. So when we went down the right to choose path to get his diagnosis, we actually ended up travelling to London to get the diagnosis made, because that was the easiest route for us. It was either that or wait 3 or 4 years for the NHS. Now, I'm not saying that's the way to go, but it was the way for us. And certainly within the last year, I've seen more things pop up in the local area of community days and whatever else. There was nothing initially. So often now, if we go out on days out, we're going further afield to be able to get to places that have sensory accommodations.
Jess, what's your experience of that? What's your thoughts on that?
Just think it's super inconsistent. And as you say, you can go into one place and it can be really understanding, and the next place and it's not at all. And I think that's why I'm passionate about this area, obviously. And what the podcast says of like included, not excluded, is exactly that. It's like if we all just educate ourselves a little bit and think, oh, okay, maybe that parent isn't like a bad parent in inverted commas. Actually, they're just dealing with something different, and we just need to give a bit of space. Say, is there anything I can do to help? Because actually, that just does the most. Because if a parent doesn't feel pressured, I don't want to speak for parents, but in my experience, then if you're not feeling pressured and like you've done a bad job in any way, shape, or form, because you haven't, you've actually just trying to meet your child's sensory needs in a world that can be really, really overstimulating. If we have understanding people around us and shops that help, and centres where they are trying to welcome children into that are understanding, then that just makes all the world of difference. Because if we end up having a trickier time, then that's okay, because there's no judgment and everyone's just there to help. And then the next time you feel like you can go back there, because you then could have a really positive experience. And we know for a lot of our children and young people, sometimes it takes a few different exposures to an environment to then be comfortable in it. And so if they have a space where they know, oh, okay, I can just sit down on this floor for 10 minutes. No one's going to come and step on me or like be in my space, and actually the environment's going to be lowered for me. Then they can suddenly access a whole space they couldn't before. So yeah, I think there's so many free resources out there now on a like Google search or a YouTube search that people can access, or this podcast, where then you can think about the autistic population and when you might come into contact with someone that has those additional sensory needs.
One of the themes that I just know is going to build over the series is around kindness. Just be kind. Just be kind. You were saying, Jess, we can offer help, and maybe parents and children aren't in a position to receive it at that moment, but that's not a judgment. That's just be kind. Laura, does that resonate with you? Do you think that sounds right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I have to admit that before we started going through this process with Rowan, I was very ignorant to, seeing other families out in the supermarket and one of the children's having a meltdown, and you instantly go to that mind frame of, oh, that's a naughty child, kicking off. And actually, you don't know what's going on. You don't know whether they're completely overwhelmed and burnt out and, having a full scale meltdown because the lights are too bright in the supermarket. It's that understanding now of actually there might be something different about that person. And, offering help. Do you want me to take your teenage child to get a coffee while you focus time on, the little one that's on the floor crying? That understanding goes a hell of a long way. And I've certainly been grateful when people have come up to me and offered help, because that's all really we need.
Just one closing thought from both of you would be really helpful. So, Laura, what would you like to share with the world that's listening to our podcast?
Oh, that's a lot of pressure, Tracie. I think just to summarise what Jessica said earlier is having that deeper understanding of each person is different, what they need is different. So when you're trying to plan sensory environments, whether it's at home or in school, it's tailoring them to the way that is suited best, and not just trying to make every autistic person fit into one box.
Love that. Thanks, Laura. Jess?
Yeah, I think for me, it's that being proactive rather than reactive is always going to be more helpful in terms of our sensory system. If we get to the point where we're overstimulated and are no longer able to tolerate any sort of more stimuli into our system, then we've got a bigger problem than if we just had a lower stimulation environment anyway to start off with. So yes, I think if places could be considerate of those different needs that might occur. And as you say, it might be that the lights need to be lower or the sound. We don't need music on top of the chatter of everyone around. Then that can be really helpful in being proactive of thinking of those needs that might be not very obvious to someone that doesn't know these things, but also might not be very obvious, as Laura said, until we've then hit a crisis and hit more of that meltdown, because actually then we are really dealing with a bigger thing. As whereas if we can be proactive and have lower arousal environments, then we're just hitting the ground running of being more accessible and inclusive for people with sensory differences.
I just wanted to round off with that inclusion doesn't only depend on policy, but it does depend on everyday environments that support families or autistic learners in their communities, so that included, not excluded. Whilst for us, it's around, how education can really be set up for children and learners to thrive. It's also about the environment they walk into and where their friends might be and the clubs they might join in the local communities and so on, and really being able to think about those environments too. Before we sign off and say goodbye, I'd just like to remind all our listeners, please subscribe, share our podcast, explore Beyond Autism resources, and stay curious, stay compassionate, and keep asking, how do I include and not exclude? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.